How do I make a Pantheon? Here's my number one tip for making Pantheons. Make them last. Do everything you're going to do with your world. All the world building, all the area creation, any plot lines that you're going to throw in there. And then see what topics you're focusing on. Because in the real world, certain cultures don't have gods for certain topics. Like the god of art is not present in every single Pantheon. So see what topics your world is focusing on, and then make topics around those particular gods. If you don't mention the ocean or sailors at all when you're building your world, maybe you don't actually need a god of the seas. Maybe they're just the god of travel and they cover a lot of different spaces. The Pantheon should be a reflection of your world. The world shouldn't be a reflection of the Pantheon, if that makes any sense. So build your world, and if you need a god, add one in as you're building it, and then at the very end, fully form your Pantheon. This will make it so your gods actually feel integrated in the world and not just left behind. There are so many Pantheons for new Dungeon Masters that are just not used or not explored because it feels like they are separate from the actual world. This method will make it so that that does not happen. Any particular terrain or climate you prefer to have in your games like Arctic, Desert, Jungle, Badlands, and more, ever ran a campaign focusing solely on one climate in particular, and if so, do you have tips for what to keep in mind? I don't think I prefer one climate or terrain over another. What I prefer is variety. I like to use as many different terrains and climates as I can to create new and interesting situations for my players and their characters. Now, have I ran a campaign where I primarily use one particular climate and or terrain? Yes, I have many times. The key to running games in one particular type of terrain, though, is making it so that the terrain is dynamic. We are not just walking across an endless desert with nothing new, or a constant blizzard in an Arctic environment. So like if I'm running in a desert environment, I'm going to have normal rolling dunes, but I might throw in an oasis every now and then, rolling salt flats, perhaps desert monuments or long forgotten towns buried by sand, just to switch up what the environment looks like. Heck, once I even threw out a cactus forest in the middle of my desert campaign, and that was just to add something new for the players to interact with, so it just wasn't endless sand. Also, if you're going to be running for one particular type of terrain, really consider how this affects the overall campaign. Like if you're running in a desert campaign, is water going to be a primary resource for the players? Or if you're running in an Arctic campaign, how are the players going to keep warm? What are they going to be doing in the winter when all the blizzard storms blow through? These are questions that you really should be asking yourself as a game master. Oh, and also you have to be stocking up on terrain maps for that particular climate. But luckily, the sponsor of today's video can help with that. The Bag of Mapping is an incredible free virtual tabletop. With it, you can easily upload maps, create grids, and make your own tokens. Seriously, this is the easiest virtual tabletop I've ever used, and is great for new and old DMs. Plus, for just $2 a month, you get to sync your D&D Beyond characters and campaigns. However, if you use the coupon code DUNGEON, you get 25% off the first 2 months of your subscription. I wish I had this virtual tabletop when I first started running games. So head over and check out the free Bag of Mapping. What are some of your best methods to get players to interact and roleplay with each other? Well, the best method I can probably give you is to make it worth your players' while to roleplay and to interact with each other. If your game system has something like inspiration or hero points, then add those in for every role-playing event. And that's pretty much what all my advice on this topic can ever boil down to. Make it worth your players' while. If they don't have a reason to roleplay with each other, yeah, some players who are more theatrical are going to want to roleplay, but you should not expect your players to roleplay if they're not going to get anything out of roleplaying with each other. I know, sounds counterintuitive to some, but always making roleplay worth something mechanically in game is a great way to promote roleplay. Yes, you have some players who want to roleplay just to roleplay. I'm one of those players, but I also have to realize as a game master that not everyone is like that, and if I want to encourage role-playing in my campaigns, then I need to incentivize role-playing. And it doesn't even need to be a lot. One extra d4 on any roll after they have a role-playing scene is enough to make players role-play all the time. Now, I would steer you away from just saying, alright, I'm going to give you a flat XP bonus after every roleplay scene, because here's the thing with experience points. They are bad motivators in most cases, because experience points don't have this tangible effect. It's that same principle of we spend more money using credit cards and debit cards than actual cash, because cash is tangible. We see the money leaving our hands, right? But a credit card, that's just kind of ethereal money, right? Like we have an understanding that that money exists, but not really. We're still monkeys, we're humans. So if you're using XP, yes, like theoretically you are getting closer to another level up, but it doesn't stick in the minds of players. Actually giving something mechanical, a discount to items, extra dice, or even just some type of benefit in the campaign that you can think of is far more effective than just flat XP bonus. So just try to incentivize players with things that they will actually use session to session. And you don't even need to push it very hard. Players will think that they're almost getting away with something because they're going to start role-playing more and they're going to say, ha, you know, we're beating the system. No, this was the intention. Any chance you'll post all the class guides and subclass reviews in one playlist. They're kind of scattered around right now and it's hard to find sometimes. Done. How do you design your Underdarks? I feel like mine are missing something / feel empty. I have the Upper Dark with more civilizations and some established paths. Medium difficulty like video games? Okay. The Middle Dark with the largest civilization and a couple settlements, but mostly a ton of unexplored tunnels. Hard difficulty. And finally the Lower Dark, which holds a hidden secret to the world's creation. Late game difficulty. I have abandoned mining tunnels all around used by the world's thieves guild to sneak around to other settlements or escape. To be honest, I don't run the Underdark all that often. It's just not an area that interests me, or just the very concept of the Underdark doesn't seem that appealing to me. When I do create for the Underdark though, because there have been many campaigns where the players have spent extended amounts of time in the Underdark, it's usually mostly centered around the campaign. What interesting locations can I throw out there to improve the player experience right then? The actual campaign that I'm running never leaves my mind. For instance, the players once went into the Underdark because they had recruited a drow princess into their party, and she had to go back to the Underdark to be wed. And so what I created for that particular Underdark adventure was all in service to the drow princess, the types of activities that they were going to be doing before the wedding. They had to prove themselves to the drow to be accepted into the city. And then there were many drow houses that they had to navigate around, certain locations that they were being sent to. And the players felt the Underdark was very alive and fulfilling with deep and rich history. But that's just because the history and the richness that they were encountering were all in service to the overall story that they were a part of. There was very little fleshed out about the Underdark besides that. If they had gone 5 miles east, there was nothing there. I had prepped nothing, but I was just purely focused in on, alright, what are we doing to make the Underdark as fun and flavorful for these particular sessions? And that's how I went about it. So you talk about the Lower Dark being very important to your world's creation story. Are the players ever going to get to the Lower Dark? Are they going to ever experience that? Or when I say, are they ever, if your answer is, yeah, they'll get to it in 30 sessions or a year, very low probability they're going to make it that far. So you kind of have to play with the mindset of, I've got 5 sessions from the current one, and if we are able to keep going, then that's great. We can get more content. But I'm always building for, these next 5 sessions are going to be amazing. They're going to be incredible. Yeah, I have a ton of world building and background behind that, but that's my primary focus. Because if you're only building for the future, if you're only building for late game, then all your cool stuff is only going to be late game. And that's what I'm kind of seeing here. Like, it feels like a lot of what you want to get to is in the Lower and the Middle Dark, but it also sounds like Upper Dark is kind of the most bland milquetoast version of your Underdark. So why are we starting there, you know? Go wild, make it fun, make it epic. Maybe there are parts of the Lower Dark that expand up to the Upper Dark so the players can mess around with those particular aspects of your world. Perhaps the civilization in the Middle Dark is beginning to progress up to the Upper Dark or something. It just feels like there's a lack of dynamism to this campaign world. And it feels like it's not shifting enough when I actually read it. If I had to put my finger on it, it feels like there's a lot of video game logic that's going on in this campaign world, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, breaking up different parts of the Underdark into difficulties, but that also makes it static. And usually static campaign worlds are less interesting than dynamic ones where things are happening, playing out in the setting. My advice is to add in this little chaos tornado to the Underdark, something to shake up the campaign area that your players can bounce off of and play with that makes it feel like this particular location isn't static. And if you don't have enough in your Underdark for 3 layers, maybe just go down to 2. Because 2 fantastic layers of the Underdark that are bursting with content is going to feel a lot better than 3 layers that are kind of half empty. If your players are starting in the upper dark, just have a vague outline of the middle and the lower dark, and then spend all your preparation and time building up the upper dark so it feels fun and dynamic, so that there are things that the players can do there. And these things should not be dependent on the other layers of the Underdark, but they should be influenced by them, if you know what I mean. Like, you don't need to go to the other levels to have fun, but the other levels are influencing this particular layer. And if you have enough content for 4 or 5 sessions, it doesn't even need to be that much. It just needs to be 1 or 2 fun sessions of content that the players can go to certain locations, feel what it's like to be in the Underdark, and to enjoy playing your characters. That's enough. And if they say, all right, we're going to journey down to the middle dark or the lower dark, just have one encounter that basically is the stopgap between upper and middle dark. And that's probably a combat encounter that's going to take up the remaining part of the session until your players, well, it's just going to take up the remaining part of the session. Yeah. And then you're going to end the session after that. And then the next time that you play, you're going to have prepped the middle dark with some of the prep that you've been doing passively as you've been going along in your campaign. And you're going to do the same thing from middle dark to lower dark, etc., etc., etc. You're just building for what the players are going to right now and making it as fun and entertaining as possible. Hopefully that makes sense, and this is how I tend to build my areas and my campaigns that keep my players coming back and theorizing about the areas. They want to spend more time in the area because I'm showing them all the cool things I have all at once with the expectation I'm going to come up with other cool things later. And I have my scaffolding. I have things in the background that we're going to get to. Like, I would know, all right, at the bottom of this Underdark, there's this big heart of creation that makes the world or whatnot. I don't know what it is in your campaign. I'm just spitballing here. But I'm going to know that. I can set up ideas that are going to relate to the lower dark in the upper and the middle dark. But I'm not making the entire area dependent on the lower dark or anything else in there. I'm making sure each area is packed full of adventure and is its own thing. I build my Underdarks for the adventure and the campaign that we're in, and I make it so that that particular area raises up the characters and makes it fun for them. Everything else is secondary. And then as they go through the area, I'm going to add a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, basically off of the background world building that I've already done. Next question. What to do when you struggle to fit the backstory of a particular player character in the overall setting of the adventure? Right now I'm running Descent into Avernus and wondering how to tie in one of my players, a shifter, shepherd, druid. This is a hard question to answer. I mean, this is a problem that really should be solved in session 0, talking to the player and saying, hey, I don't know how I'm going to fit your character into this particular setting. Let's work through this together. Or let's see if we can come up with a plot hook or 2 and adjust the backstory so that we can make these connections. Because you as the game master should be able to look through a backstory, and if you don't find anything, you should be able to go to your players and say, hey, I'm struggling here. Let's figure out some more hooks that might work. That way I can tie your character into the campaign. Now, it seems like you went past that already, so we have to turn to other tactics. if there is nothing that's jumping out of the backstory at you that you can tie into, think of theme. So we have a shifter, shepherd, druid. A shifter is all about changing their form to gain a benefit. You have the shepherd druid, which is all about the guiding of animals, having a flock, druids in communion with nature. So we have these three thematic pillars that you're telling me right away exist right there. So we're going to try and look with the Descent into Avernus campaign and figure out, all right, is there something that we can tie into this particular character thematically to make it so that they feel that they are more connected to the story? I mean, right off the bat, Zariel was changed. She was changed from her fall into Avernus. This is, I don't think, a spoiler. This is just Zariel's backstory. And, you know, there's a flock of fallen angels. I mean, Zariel was a leader. She was a general. So you might be able to tie in that character thematically. You know, this character is all about changing themselves. There could be characters in Avernus that comment on that. It's like, yep, Zariel was trying to do this. You know, she was taking on some of these infernal powers, attempting to, you know, fight the demons in the Blood War, fight devils, etc. She lost herself. Are you going to do the same with these shifter powers and abilities down here in hell? Or, you know, you are someone who leads a flock of animals, familiars, fae spirits, etc. Whatever your shepherd druid is leading consistently in a campaign. And they might say, you know, you feel a lot like Zariel. Do you realize that, right? Everyone who brings their flock down here falls. And your flock will fall with you. Not just the creatures you summon, but you're going to cause your party to be led into destruction as well. So we're going to go on this very thematic level that is going to ideally tie into this player character. Then from there, we can go and we can look at different aspects of their backstory, if they created it. If there are any NPCs that are in there, locations, you know, whatever, we're going to try to extract those and put them into Descent into Avernus. The easiest thing to do when you're running pre-written adventures is to say, all right, this is an NPC here in Avernus, in this pre-written campaign, and they kind of resemble a NPC that a player has written in their backstory. So we're just going to swap the names, and we're going to add in a little bit of backstory context to this NPC that's already there, and we've now integrated a player's backstory into this pre-written campaign. Simple as that. We're looking for these gray areas that we can change to fit the pre-written adventure so that we can bring the player character into the story. And even if the player hasn't constructed a backstory, we can passively construct a backstory as game masters. Like, if the players are going through Avernus and they hear about an NPC, you can turn to the, you know, circle of the shepherd druid and say, you know, you heard about this NPC when you were in your grove. Like, this was a person you knew, and now they're here in hell. That's strange, and you can start building story from that. I mean, all the time, players will give me backstories where the PC is basically from another planet, like they have no connection to the world that the setting is in, but I'm always looking for these connections that can be made. And even if they're not direct connections, I'm still looking for those thematic connections to make it feel like this player character is still tied into the story. You know, maybe they are not tied to the world, but thematically, they are the hero that this world needs. You know, this shifter druid is either the person that shows, no, like I won't be corrupted by hell. I won't make the same mistakes. I will be a good shepherd. Or, yes, hell is always corrupting. No matter how good we think we are, we fall to those corrupting forces, those infernal powers. And they go the exact same route as Zariel, or somewhere in between. It doesn't really matter. So really look at your player character, what pieces you have working in the story, and try to make those connections. Moving on to the next question, I want to write a sequel to a campaign we finished previously at level 12, but I don't know if I want the campaign to start that high level, and some players are interested in bringing back their characters from last campaign. Is there a way to make characters weaker that doesn't seem horrifically unfun for the players? I mean, it all kind of depends on your group and your players. If you sit down with your players and you say, look, there's going to be an event that levels your characters back down so that we can fit what this campaign is going to be, and they agree to it, it's fine. Your players knew what they were getting into, they signed up for it, and therefore, yeah, maybe it might suck that they don't have access to Fireball anymore, but they're gonna get it back eventually, and they're playing a character that they really enjoyed. I think also, in my experience, because I've done things like this, where we have to level player characters back down to fit something. It depends on the reason for leveling down those characters. Like, if the characters get leveled down after they defeat a demigod, or they make this great sacrifice, usually the players aren't that upset about it. They got a major victory, they did something impactful in the campaign world, and so yes, their characters made a sacrifice. They're not dead though, and they understand that they'll work their way back up. You know, this was a Pyrrhic victory, if you will. Now, other players won't like that for any reason. They're going to look at leveling down their character and they're going to lose their minds, and there's nothing you can do about that. You can be the greatest DM ever, and yet they still will not find that experience enjoyable. So talk to your players, explain the situation that you're going through, and see if they would still be willing to have the characters be leveled down in some great event. I don't know what your story is, but I'm sure that you can figure out some reason why they would get leveled down if they made this great sacrifice or pulled off an incredible feat. This next question, though, is going to be from my Patreon. If you go over and you sign up, you'll have all your questions answered every single month. Also, I offer DM coaching over there, so if you want some more one-on-one help, if you're having some specific issues with your campaign, go over there and sign up. Sergey's question, though, is, I'm wondering if you tried longer downtime periods in D&D campaigns. In the one I'm running now, we recently had an 8-month downtime, and it went pretty well, I think. I'm planning to have pretty large time skips to certain established setting events. 10 years total from level 3 to presumably level 8 to 9. If you tried something like that, how did that work out, and what are potential pitfalls to avoid? I mean, I do things like this all the time. Longer periods of downtime just help to give this sense of realism in campaigns, where if everything's taking place over the course of 2 weeks, it might be hard for players to wrap their minds around that. But if you can look back at the end of a campaign and say, okay, this took us 2 to 3 years, that makes a bit more sense. Yeah, longer downtimes are great, especially if you're trying to level up players a little bit more, give them time to progress their relationships with NPCs, or just giving them time to complete large projects that they've been wanting to get to for a long time. Sometimes campaigns are just so snappy, and players feel like they just want some time to rest or to get a strong foundation under them. And these long downtimes give them a chance to do that. And this is great as well if you know, all right, my campaign is going to be going on maybe a little bit of a hiatus for a month or so. So we're just going to say at the end of next session, you guys are going to have the chance to go on a longer period of downtime, and you can come up with whatever reason you want for that. But in this longer period of downtime, your players can still be interacting with the campaign during a hiatus, because they'll say, all right, I want to be doing this during the downtime, or hey, can we have a private session where I'm going to go explore this one dungeon, or whatever you want to do. So yeah, longer downtimes, fantastic. I think the one pitfall of this downtime is players attempting to do a little bit too much, trying to get their player characters a little bit too powerful, or doing too much in the world. So setting this general cap for what they can do is probably a good idea. Like if you're doing 6 months of downtime, it might take a month or two of constant work to get a feat or a level or whatever power level you're trying to do for this campaign. Just make sure to set your limits, and then once you get out of this longer downtime, really take your time to narrate what all that happened, because it can be sometimes jarring for players to jump back into a campaign and then, oh my gosh, everything has changed. So just give a little bit of narration, update all the players on what's been happening in the campaign world, and give your players the easiest onboarding process to get back into the campaign after this long time skip. However, it's one of my favorite things to do this in campaigns, whether it be when players are traveling, if they're building up for some large event, whatever. Just giving long periods of downtime is a fantastic idea. Next question we're getting to today: what are some ways you can emphasize the state of existentialism when your players are exploring, for example, an alternate plane? But you activated my trap card a little bit here, because while I talk about TTRPGs a lot, philosophy is my passion. Like I helped to write a chapter in a book, the existentialism part of this book right here. I did a TED Talk relating to philosophy. I've helped and worked on many academic papers regarding philosophy. So yeah, existentialism is kind of my thing. And I think that in the way you're using existentialism, you're talking about it in terms of what this state of angst, I'm assuming, which is kinda existentialism, kinda not. Really, though, existentialism deals with the human experience and existence, and the trouble with us existing as humans in a world that we're not really suited for. However, a major topic in existentialism is this concept of angst, of anxiety. It pops up in Kierkegaard to Sartre. And so, when we're talking about this general feel and the way you're using it, I'm going to interpret existentialism as this state of constant underlying anxiety. But for all of you out there, that's not what existentialism really is. I'm sorry to harp on it, but it's kind of my thing. I need to make a D&D philosophy video at some point. I've got it cooking up. I just need to get it right. But yeah, existentialism, if you're going to talk about it, existential angst is probably the best way to kind of describe it, for this underlying feeling of, not being right in the world. And you're talking about it in terms of an alternate plane, which is what I think you're trying to get at here. So let's see if I can tackle this. So when I'm talking about this here, firstly, when I describe angst or anything else, philosophers cannot agree on anything. If I say anything in this video upon any philosophical topic, some philosopher or someone who knows anything about philosophy will come around and try to correct, because that's just what we do. Philosophers can't agree on anything at all, ever. So take everything with a grain of salt and do your own research. But the heart of this existentialist angst is a look for meaning, purpose, value. And we can extrapolate that, I think, onto this plane of existence, an alternate plane or a strange landscape. If we don't know the meaning of something, the purpose behind why things, do what they do, or the value of anything on a particular plane or weird liminal space, we can use that and we can tap into angst. To really try to invert player expectations, show them that what they place meaning in normally in the campaign is not true here. How they can't understand the purpose of the area that they're in. If they're walking along and they're meandering down a road and, the creatures or denizens of this place say, you have to stay on this, road, else you will turn blue. Players might not understand what that means. They don't know the purpose or the meaning behind it. But once they step off the road, they turn into a rock or something terrible happens to them. They can't understand. It's not blue at all. They have this lack of foundation for how the world operates. And if they can't trust any of their senses, they can't make any assumptions about the world, they don't know what the true meaning of things are, that creates angst. And many existentialists, I think, would argue that not knowing this meaning of existence drives a lot of angst normally in humans. It's one of our primary sources of anxiety. So we can create that anxiety in these places by just taking away and, making a mockery of meaning, if you will. If you're wanting to get even deeper into these feelings of angst, Jean-Paul Sartre's book, Being in Nothingness, is fantastically weird as a book. It's a very long book, but I think it's chapter 4 when he talks about a concept called the look and the other. Now, professional philosophers in major colleges and universities have been discussing this particular chapter for 60, 70 years at this point, probably more, almost 100 years, I think, for Being in Nothingness. Now, this particular section talks about the other, how everyone not us is other, and how we look at each other is almost antagonistic. Anything not us is kind of threatening, and we are trying to impose our reality on the other via the look. It's this constant adversarial relationship. And that's something that I use a lot in these weird liminal spaces, these alternate planes, places where the party is supposed to feel uncomfortable, where the actual space around them, the setting is other. And if the setting is other trying to enforce their will on the party, that creates angst. It's an antagonistic relationship with the other. There are so many great series out there that really work with this concept. You know, if you've ever listened to the Magnus Archives, or I Am in Askew, or many other, horror audio podcasts, this is a concept and topic that they play with constantly, and you can too. What is the being of the setting? What is it at its core? And then how is that going to attempt to change the player characters? If you can get this concept down, which I know it's really weird, and I don't think even Sartre really had a great handle on it, then you can do some really interesting stuff in your campaigns with just the passive feeling of the setting creating an angst, and the players have to get out of this setting, else it will change them, because this place is antagonistic, and they have to preserve themselves, else succumb to the other. It's strange, I don't know if I'm explaining it well, but if you really want to have this, existential angst in a D&D setting, or any TTRPG, book that you're using, this is a great way to do it. Remove meaning, remove purpose, remove value, insert the other, and have them just gaze at the party, trying to change them in some way that the party does not want. That's a bit of a high-level topic, but sorry, you should have known. Skill issue. You do have another question here, though, which isn't philosophy related. Or is it? Is everything philosophy related? Who knows? Hey, how would you go about selecting players for your campaign? I'm running my first series campaign in a few months, and I'm trying to decide which of my friends who have shown interest I should invite to play. What do you look for when selecting groups of people to play together? Well, the first thing I look for is level of commitment. If you're trying to play a serious game, trying to gauge just how committed these players are scheduling-wise to the campaign is important. I would rather take 4 quote-unquote average players than take, 4 fantastic players that flake all the time. Because consistency when playing and running your games, just week to week, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever, having that consistency is what makes games survive. Erratic scheduling is the killer of campaigns. After I look at scheduling, availability, and commitment, though, which is my number one thing for putting together a play group, I'm looking for, alright, do these players enjoy generally some of the same things in a campaign? Because if I have a group of players where half of them love combat, want to fight all the time, the other half just want to RP, they don't care about combat at all, there are problems there, you can see. And then of course I'm looking for table etiquette. I am looking for players who build each other up, who are willing to talk through their problems, who help others to shine. And you can't find those golden goose players all the time, but I'm looking for people, specifically who aren't on the other end of the spectrum, who, throw a hissy fit when something doesn't go their way, who constantly steal scenes from other players, who just bring down the overall experience. Those types of players are so toxic. And after so many years, I'm done playing with them. I don't want them to be at my table. You can do so many other things. However, if you are someone who is actively trying to disrupt what other players are doing, and who is just trying to be the quote-unquote main character at the table that's bringing everything down for everyone else, I don't want you there. Like, I am always on the lookout for those types of players, and I can usually feel them when I meet them. And I would, if they ask, I might say, maybe if a table opens up, if we have a one-shot, I'm not going to go off of an intuition, but usually if there's a one-shot and I see it happening, I go, okay, you're off the list. Unless something radically changes with you, you're not going to be in one of my long-term campaigns. And that's really it. I'm not looking for system experience. I'm not looking for knowledge. I don't care if you're a power gamer or someone who's just trying to make this quirky character, because I know I can make all that work. I'm looking for the player. Who are you as a person? Do you have social skills? Can you be part of the symphony that we are creating at the table, or are you trying to be a solo act? I'm trying to look for people that are wanting to be part of a band and not trying to be a solo act, if that makes sense. So a player can be great in all other aspects of the game, but if they're not right for a table, then they're automatically off the list. So, in summary, look for people that have the time to commit to a serious campaign, because if you're trying to be serious, having a locked down and consistent schedule, number one thing that's going to make your campaign succeed. Then make sure the players all kind of fit together. They're in the same kind of... So in summary, look for players, if you want a serious campaign, that can commit to a consistent schedule. You know, if they are in a point in their life where they can't, they're probably not great for a serious campaign. You know, beer and pretzels campaigns, sandboxy fun, yeah, those players are great if they don't have a consistent schedule. If their schedule is inconsistent, though, they can't really show up to these campaigns consistently, it's probably not going to work as well. I mean, consistency is the number one thing that's going to decide the success of most campaigns in any TTRPG. So always look for consistent players over anything else. Then I'm going to look for players that enjoy the same kinds of experiences in TTRPGs. I'm not going to look for carbon copies, but you know, if there are massive gaps between what different players want, I'm not going to throw them in the same group together. And the third thing is table etiquette. You know, are you just a decent person? And if you have not played before, do I think that you can be trained up to be that great player who shares the spotlight, who works with others, who communicates, etc. Basically, can you be a fucking normal person at a table? And if you can, great. If people check all three of those boxes, easy to send that invite. Hopefully that helps. Are you planning on doing an in-depth series on other classes like you did with the Fighter and Druid? I really enjoyed those videos and they gave me a lot of inspiration for gaming for and playing those classes. Yeah, I get this question sometimes, and I'll be straight up with you guys. Those videos do average to below average most of the time. They don't necessarily do great. And I can see why. You know, I came in later to this space, you know, after 5th edition had been out for a while, so other videos just beat me to the punch for some of these classes. And then for subclass videos, why you should play, you know, for most of the audience, you're not going to know why you should play certain subclasses. You know, people want to go and watch the videos of the most popular subclasses, but you know, for some niche subclasses, people don't really care as much. Those videos do significantly worse than average. And the truth is, those videos take the most time to make, or you know, a large majority of my time. And so if I spend, like, let's take the Ranger video, the Ranger class guide. I spent easily 100 hours on that video, writing, recording, editing, re-editing, going through drafts, getting the thumbnail right. And it's sitting after a few months at like 20,000 views. When you look at some of my more recent videos, and it's been 2 weeks, and we're sitting at over 50,000 views, right? So there's just a cost-benefit analysis there. And the same thing with the subclass videos. Those videos take a long time to make. And even then, with all of those videos, I'm still going to get a ton of hate from people because I didn't say the exact thing they wanted about a subclass, or you know, a subclass feature that I look at, I go, you know, that's not really important, that's not a thing, and I just get wave after wave hate comments. I'm like, well, this makes me want to do these videos less. I would more rather interact with people who have questions, who are trying to build their campaigns, who are trying to make better characters, than to kind of have a mechanical squabbling fest, which is what some of those comment sections just break down into. Now, I do want to get to it as well. I do also have hesitancy because of the new kind of edition that's dropping later this year. So, you know, there are many things up in the air in regard to all of this. I do want to do more of those videos, though. And I am going to do them because I think that there are there are aspects to those videos where we can talk about subclasses that aren't as well known, that I have seen, that I've played with, that I've DM'd for, that I can give insight into that perhaps other content creators just can't. And I want more of this optimistic series. Like one of my favorite videos I ever did was the Purple Dragon Knight. I loved to talk about a subclass that so many people hated on, be able to say, actually, when you play a Purple Dragon Knight or Banneret or whatever you're going to call the subclass, and you just make a few tweaks, it's a great subclass. And for the right campaign, you don't need to make any tweaks. It's just very good. It's a very solid subclass. So, with all that in mind, I'm going to try and do that more. And I've decided to hire an editor or editors because the biggest stopgap here in this entire process is literally just the editing of a video. It takes an exorbitant amount of time for me to edit videos, and if I could dispense some of that work and effort onto others that I would ideally try and pay as well as I could, then yeah, definitely something I'm looking into. And in the comment section of this video, I have my business email, and it's going to ideally tell you how to apply if you want to be an editor and to edit some of these videos. Because also, very openly, end of 2024 is going to be a very, very busy time for me. And I'm going to try and stockpile as many videos as I can to make sure that there's not a gap in content, that videos are going to keep on chugging along at a great pace. Now, with that in mind, I definitely need help with that to make sure that all of these ideas get from the head out onto the channel. So, definitely, if you're interested or people that would be interested in editing, contact me, because I would love to get a chance to work with some of you and to make more content at a decent pace. So yeah, if you're interested, look in the video description, look in the comments. There should be some information there. If you want more of these videos, hopefully they should be out shortly. I don't know though. Moving on to the next question. What do you do when your PCs don't agree on goals in a sandboxy game? Not in a hostile way or anything, just a general lack of interest in each other's ideas. I don't have this problem. Plot web. I just make a plot web because this is the point of the plot web. You tie PCs' goals into each other so that the PCs begin to realize, oh wait, if we go off and we do this other thing, that will help us all, because we don't know how, but all of this is connected. So we should care about each other. The goal of a plot web is to tie your PC's interests and ideas into one another. So if you're making a plot web in a sandbox campaign, it's going to look like, the PCs kind of have these overlapping interests, and pursuing one PC's ideas or plot line is going to help and give information and benefits to all the other PCs, ideally. But really, this is the job of any game master. We are trying to point our players all in one direction. If our plot hooks are spreading them to the four winds, that's kind of on us. Like, we need to figure out reasons to point them at collective goals. So like I said earlier, make it in the best interest of others to take an interest in other PCs. Give them world benefits or even mechanical benefits for doing so. Use the carrot. Give them benefits for doing what you want them to do. Actionable, real, tangible benefits. Otherwise, do your best to unify the goals of the party together so that it stops becoming multiple player characters and one group. And when you stop looking at it in terms of multiple characters and you start looking at a campaign as the story of a singular group, this is where the magic of storytelling happens. Now, if you need just a few initial ideas for how to do this, you can put a bounty on each idea or quest and say, all right, if you guys do this quest, this is a party benefit that you're going to get. Be very open and honest, kind of at a meta level with the players. Or you can introduce an NPC that is going to kind of be the go-between between the player characters and say, okay, this is what this one person wants. Hey, this is what you can get if you go and you do this mission, and giving them more reasons to go and care about others' ideas. But also, at a certain level, this is a table problem. If you've done all that you can and the table still isn't linking up, it's time to have an out of character conversation and say, look guys, you're pulling in different directions, but a TTRPG is a team game. You gotta be a team here. And if you're not gonna be a team, this isn't gonna work out. So we're gonna have a conversation now to try and resolve these things. Now, I've had to do that only once at one of my tables, and the players got it. They said, okay, yeah, we're pulling in too many directions. Let's see if we can resolve this together. And it was resolved, and it was great. So keep these tips and tricks in mind, but maybe the first thing that you should do, if this is becoming a real problem, is to just talk about it quickly out of game with the players so that they can all come to more of a consensus with each other. Talking is one of the greatest answers to any problem you're having in a TTRPG game. How do I make my enemy variety interesting? I've been defaulting to ranged attacker plus melee for my combats, and it's hard to break out of this mindset. Well, in this video about damage calculation, I talk a little bit more about enemy types, but if you're trying to just flat out break the ranged attacker melee attacker combo, try this mindset on for size. Think about enemies in terms of how they can challenge your players when working together. Like, one group of enemies is challenging their constitution saves. Another group of enemies is challenging how they can interact when having to deal with enemies who use cover often. More often than not, I think interesting combats boil down to how you can challenge the players and make them solve a puzzle within the combat itself. I advise thinking about enemies also in terms of how they work together. So like, if you have an enemy type that does AoE cold damage, and you have another enemy type in that same combat that is immune to cold damage, that's a great combination. You can make so many great scenarios using the way these two enemy types work with each other in the same combat. So like, here's an example of this in action actually in the Solondis campaign that I'm going to be talking about towards the end of this video. I have an enemy type called Crows and an enemy type called Gaunts. The Crows get a bonus when they are attacking with allies around them. It's a pretty significant bonus in the system. The Gaunts are an enemy type that, while they don't do a lot of damage, are incredibly difficult to kill, and they can even sometimes revive themselves after dying. The way I've used these two enemy types to make very interesting encounters is to use a few Crows with a lot of Gaunts. The party has to pick out the Crows from the Gaunts, because while there are more Gaunts, and yes, they're doing damage, really the main damage dealers are the Crows, and it doesn't make a lot of tactical sense to attack the Gaunts if they're just going to get back up. They need to clear out the big damage dealing enemies first. Now, this is a very simple example, but I think it gets my point across well. By pairing an enemy that basically has super pack tactics with an enemy that's very difficult to kill, you gain a new level of complexity and interest within the combat encounter itself, with two, honestly, very meager and bland stat blocks. So my advice is, if you're in a combat rut, think about how the enemy types are working together and how they are specifically challenging your party. Or hey, check out some of the Encounter of the Week videos. They didn't do very well when I was releasing them, but I think that they are still pretty good videos, so if you want some ideas, check them out. Let's see, the next comment is 3 questions in one. First one, how would you go about running a game for people that don't enjoy a fantasy setting with gods? I would probably run a game that's not set in a fantasy setting. In all seriousness though, there are many TTRPGs that don't exist in a fantasy setting, so if you have players that don't traditionally like a fantasy setting, then you don't need to run in a fantasy setting TTRPG. And even then, you're the game master. You can just say, okay, in this world, there are no gods. You can still have a cleric and a paladin stat block, but perhaps it's not gods, but just their raw faith that is fueling the magic or whatever. Let's see, next up, what are the aspects of dungeon crawling that you do like? So for those of you that do not know, I'm not the biggest fan of dungeon crawling in my campaigns. And it's not really for any one particular reason. I like solving puzzles, I like random encounters here and there, I like traps. It's just everything continuously going on endlessly that I'm not a fan of. For me, dungeon crawling can be rather monotonous. And more often than not, I run into games where it's just the exact same style over and over and over again. And that gets very dull and boring to me very quickly. I like variety in my games. However, I'm trying to branch out, and I'm going to be running a very large dungeon crawling section in an upcoming campaign. So I might learn a thing or two that I haven't really picked up on before, and I'm going to try some new things with how I build my mega dungeons. So who knows? This answer might change, and if you talk to me in a year, I might have warmed up to the idea of dungeon crawling a bit more. For me, though, it's just the monotony of dungeon crawling that I do not like, or being in a dungeon where it just feels like it's one task after another. There's not really this cohesion, and I'm spending so much time in the dungeon and really not doing anything of note with my character, their backstory, or for the overall plot of the adventure. Last question here. Any good traps, puzzles, riddles that made for a fun dungeon experience for the players? I mean, there are so many. I mean, I've been running TTRPGs for more than 10 years now. There are, maybe hundreds of different traps, puzzles, and riddles that have worked for me and my players. I think I want to give you a more general answer, though. I think the best traps are ones that the players can identify and work around, that just aren't sprung on the players, that give them a chance to solve a problem or the puzzle. I think the fun of traps isn't necessarily them getting sprung on you and the players having to make a save, but the fun of the trap is seeing the trap and then figuring out how to get around the trap. And I think that's something that we miss very often. Then in terms of puzzles, I think a good puzzle builds on itself. So I'm a big fan of puzzles that are reoccurring in dungeons, that build over time, kind of a Portal, Talos Principle, Witness style of puzzle design. Also, I would say for puzzles that the goal of a puzzle is to be solved. Like, we want to have the players solve a puzzle. And so in my eyes, a bad puzzle is a puzzle where the players are just slamming their head against a wall for 10, 20, 30 minutes. I've heard stories of other DMs saying, oh yeah, my player spent an hour on one puzzle. I'm just like, why? Why would we ever want to do that? I don't find that fun and engaging. I would probably check out somewhere along the way because I ran out of ideas 20 minutes into solving the puzzle. So I try to make puzzles that build on themselves and that are simple enough where the players can move around the different aspects of the puzzle and are never really stuck on the puzzle themselves. If I make a very difficult puzzle, there will usually be offshoots in a dungeon or an area where they can go off and do other things and return to the puzzle later. And I found that that works very well in most circumstances. And then for riddles, I think a good riddle strategy is to write the riddle yourself, and to kind of have this kind of pyramid structure where the first line of the riddle should be incredibly broad. Then the second line of the riddle is almost like a play on words where you can take it at face value and the riddle means one thing, or you take it another way and that's kind of the way that the riddle is trying to take the meaning of the words. And the last line or the last few lines of the riddle are very specific, and honestly, if you know the answer to the riddle, they should give it away. For riddles, I almost look at them with the mindset of puzzles but higher, and I say that because riddles, I just hate spending too much time on them. I think a good riddle is something that's done quickly. In 3 to 5 minutes, the players toss around a few ideas, then they get a list, they'll try out the ideas to figure out the riddle, and then they'll go from there. And really, I never like to have riddles stand alone. I like it when riddles are part of something. So if you're doing a puzzle, they might uncover a riddle halfway through the puzzle in a specific room, and solving that riddle is what gets them a necessary piece of the puzzle, let's say. Standalone riddles to doors, that can be good, that can be interesting, but I think the riddle is a side dish and a puzzle is like the main course, if you know what I mean. And traps are like the appetizer. You do the trap first to get players ready for danger in a dungeon. and you go in, they're solving the puzzle. You know, they might have a riddle or a little test, like an ability check every now and then, if you're doing something like in a D&D 5th edition system. But that's kind of how I think about those aspects of the game. So in summary for that, I think the fun of a trap is the players seeing the trap and trying to get around the trap. The fun of a puzzle is kind of building on the mechanics that you've already thrown out there and having a puzzle where they're not ever grinding to a complete and utter halt. You know, I kind of think about it in my head as if you're doing a spinning block puzzle, let's say. Like, the players are always spinning the block. There's never a point where they just run out of things to do for a puzzle. There's always something that can happen, a different gear to turn, a lever to pull, whatnot. And the puzzle should not be so obtuse for your players where they just get completely stuck. Like, yeah, you want to have them test their brain power to a particular point, but you never want them to be just ran into the ground with the puzzle. And then riddles they're nice, they're side dishes, but usually you throw the riddle in with other aspects of the game to kind of enhance it. The riddle is a change of pace from the average session. How would you handle your players fighting a Titan-sized creature? I'm talking like massive Kaiju scale. For example, God of War 3, first level, or even Shadow of the Colossus type of fights. I think it would be insane to have the terrain also be the enemy at the same time, especially for a final boss encounter. I feel like Theater of the Mind would be best for this, but what do you think? Would you do any skill challenges with this in some way? So I think you're pretty close here. I love running Kaiju-esque fights. I've done it, gosh, now more than 30 times at the very least. I've even lost count of how many encounters I've done this. For what works best for me, you're pretty close. Theater of the Mind, I think, is very necessary, just mainly because movement becomes very difficult in a Kaiju fight. You know, I almost throw movement speed out the window. You know, the players are moving with what fits for the story and the narrative. Even things like fall damage, I'm kind of tossing to the side, more or less, to simulate the fantasy. I have done skill challenge-esque moments in these fights, usually either to get to the fight or moving across the creature, but mainly the way I run these fights is that the players are trying to attack certain weak points in the creature, a la Shadow of the Colossus. When they do enough damage to these weak points, they get an opening to do the thing that allows them to kill the creature. So as an example, if your players are fighting a Tarask, they have to carve away parts of the carapace of the creature in order to get at its heart. There might be 2 or 3 weak points at the carapace. Maybe they need to deal 200 or 300 damage to each part of the carapace. That way it drops away and they open up the weak point. The best advice, though, I can give you for these kaiju-sized combats is to embrace Rule of Cool. You're usually going to be breaking out of the traditional rule set of your TTRPG system when you're running these type of fights. So, understand that. Have your players understand that. Leave the things that don't support the fantasy aside and dive full into crazy bombastic action, because that's what you're doing. Embrace that fighting Titans is a completely different style of combat and almost needs its own particular set of rules. However, I love running Titan encounters, so by all means, go for it. Last question for today. Would you use dinosaurs in D&D? I have used dinosaurs in D&D. How could you build a campaign around them as a main or major threat? I mean, pretty easily, I would think. Dinosaurs are a creature type just like dragons, mind flayers, giants, or anything else in the monster manual. I mean, there's a million different campaigns you can run with them. Dinosaurs being controlled by an evil lich, dinosaurs escaping from a strange portal, now they're terrorizing the landscape, trapped on an island with dinosaurs. The possibilities are endless. As for the main threat, I think dinosaurs are threatening. There's enough types and varieties to make them a danger to the players. And you might be saying, well, the highest CR dinosaur out there is like a CR 8 Tyrannosaurus Rex. That's not enough for a campaign, and maybe, but you have up to CR 30 creatures in the monster manual. Just reflavor the creatures in the monster manual to be dinosaurs. You see, that's not a white dragon, that's a Tundra Brontosaurus. I mean, the only change I would make to the stat block would be that the Arctic Brontosaurus couldn't fly, and I would vastly extend the reach of its attacks. Reflavoring is your friend, and it's free. See, but actually using dinosaurs in a campaign, I think what I would do is I would figure out the main idea of why I'm using dinosaurs. What part of those dinosaurs do I want to use and how do I want to integrate them into the storyline? Then I would choose the basic dinosaur stat blocks and I would take a few more normal monster stat blocks and reflavor them to be other kind of mutant dinosaurs or dinosaurs with a twist. That way there's enough enemy variety to keep the campaign interesting. I would run dinosaurs the exact same way I would run a campaign based around giants, dragons, or any other monster type, basically. Now, if you like this video, consider checking out this one right here. And also consider heading over to my Patreon where I offer one-on-one DM coaching. And thank you for entering the dungeon.